Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to have all of you with us today, and we hope you're going to enjoy this webinar on measuring and promoting global peacefulness with the Institute for Economics and Peace. Thank you so much again for attending. Maybe in the meantime, as we start, feel free to add in the chat where you're joining us today. Next slide, please, Catherine. And we'll keep an eye on all of you. Great. So welcome again, everyone. My name is Balqis. You probably heard from me or saw me in a webinar before. I'm the co-champion of the and the youth advisor of the Youth Engagement Community of Practice. And we have Justine, my colleague, with us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm the advisor of Youth and Inclusion at Making Sense International, and I also work with Balqis on the Communities of Practice. I'm really excited for today's webinar and for our guests and to hear from all of you as well.
Great. Thank you, Justine. Yeah, so for the agenda today, we've already done the welcome and introductions. We're going to hear from our great speaker from the Institute for Economics and Peace on the Global Peace Index and the Ambassadors Program. We'll then have a discussion. We'll have a Q&A where you'll have the chance to interact with our speaker, share your thoughts, questions, whatever it is, and then we'll do quick closing and reminders. Next slide, please. So if you're new and you haven't attended any of our webinars before, or if you are already a member of our Youth Engagement Community of Practice, this is just a reminder for all of you. This is about Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation. So YP2LE is a USAID funded activity that aims to deepen the integration of the positive youth development evidence and best practices into youth programming and ensure more sustainable change. So this is a quick background of YP2LE. Next slide, please. And our youth engagement COP specifically is focused on meaningful youth engagement in all aspects of youth programming. Our members of the COP youth engagement are diverse. They come from all around the world. We have over 400 members with different expertise. They contribute to building a common sense of purpose. They share interests, ideas, needs, resources, and expertise with other COPs. They engage respectfully in all of our platforms. And other COP and network members, they attend quarterly virtual meetings like this one. So we have webinars and we have also chat coffee hours that we've had before. They participate in the COP discussion group on the youthpower.org, which we'll discuss at the very end of our webinar today. And they identify, engage in relevant opportunities in the learning network. Next slide, please. So we have a few guiding principles if you're joining us just now. And again, as a reminder for all of you who've been with us for a while, our guiding principles evolve around fostering meaningful connection, mapping a network of engagement, creating and curating practical resources, weaving inclusion into the fabric of network, ensuring member agency and agility, and empowering champions to facilitate. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is a quick background about us and who we are. Again, we're very happy to have you with us today. And now I'm going to give the floor to Justine to introduce the theme of our webinar today and talk about our speaker.
Thanks so much for that, Balqis. So today's webinar is about measuring and promoting global peacefulness with the Institute for Economics and Peace. We'll be focusing on the 17th edition of the Global Peace Index. They will be discussing the key findings and trends of the report, also learning more about their ambassador program and the impact and role that youth can play in global peace, and then setting us up for the second webinar in this series, which will be learning about positive peace. And so I'm more than happy to invite our guest speaker, Serge, to introduce themselves.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Thank you very much for attending the webinar also. And thank you very much for inviting the Institute for Economics and Peace to present today some results of their core research measuring and quantifying peace. So as you can see on the slide, I'm based in Brussels. I am the Director of Europe and the Middle East North Africa region for the Institute for Economics and Peace, and at the global level, I am the Global Director for Security, Defense, and Intelligence. So just to put in perspective the fact that we are very interested in collaborating with both organizations organizing today's webinar is the fact that I'm definitely the oldest guy in the office here, and the average age of all other participants must be under 25 in my office. So really at the Brussels office of the Institute for Economics and Peace, but globally also, we do trust into the quality, the knowledge and the skills of young people, and also their capacity to make our company grow, but also to make a difference when it comes to measuring and quantifying peace. So I'll see if this is working, if I can move myself the slides forward. Doesn't seem to work this time. Oh, there we go. So what I'm going to do today is, of course, talk to you about the Global Peace Index 2023, but I will say a few words about positive peace. And at the end, definitely also more about our Peace Ambassadors program and the potential for training that you will find at the Institute for Economics and Peace. Within this presentation of the Global Peace Index, I will go over the key findings, the trends in peace, so basically open the time window a little bit to see if we can identify some trends. I will talk about the economic value of peace, or the economic cost of violence, depending on which side of the coin you want to address this issue. And I will finish by some few words on the conflict hotspots. So, yeah, if you can go to the next slide, because it's not working on my side. So what we do at the Institute for Economics and Peace, first of all, we are an independent, not-for-profit think tank. And what we do is try to build a greater understanding of the key drivers of peace, as well as identifying the economic benefits that come along with a more peaceful situation. So we measure and quantify peace, really the empirical evidence, empirical measurements of peace. And what we also do is identify all the benefits coming along with a more peaceful situation. So those benefits could be, of course, economic or financial. So we see that all the economic indicators will go up, but also ESG indicators, happiness, well-being, and many, many other measures of resilience. We try to work at the intersection between business, economics, and peace. Still not working, Catherine. So if you could take over, I will say next slide every time. So next slide, please. So we try to do a lot of good work. So of course, a lot of our core research is for public goods, and really, as you can see, interesting a lot of people. So we have about, I think now by the end of the fiscal year in Australia, we must have something close to 50 billion media impressions, 1.5 billion social media impressions. We are present in the majority of the countries of the world. We publish about 10 reports a year, a huge number of book references and university courses. And what we also do is, as you can see on the bottom right of our slide, so we do, of course, research, but we do a lot of consultancy for multilaterals, governments, private sector foundations, and a lot of training also. And this training would come into the form of positive peace workshops throughout the world. Next. So let's talk about the key indicators, the key findings for this year, some highlights on the Global Peace Index, and some results and trends. And I need to warn you, it's not going to be a good news show today, as you can expect. Next. So we measure and quantify what we call negative peace, which would be the absence of violence or the fear of violence, through 23 indicators. So this is a very complex index that we are producing every year. These 23 indicators come in 3 baskets. So there are 6 measures of ongoing domestic and international conflict. So we try to see how much a country is implicated or really participating into conflict, both internal and international. We have 10 measures of what we call societal safety and security. So there we're really going to look at the impact of terrorism, the number of homicides, the perception of criminality, the number of people incarcerated, things like this. And then we have 7 measures of militarization, looking at budgets, number of people working for defense, import, export of weapons, presence of weapons of mass destruction. But there is also one positive indicator there, and that's the investment made in UN peace-building operations. As said before, 17th edition, covering almost 100% of the world population. Next. So this is a map that you would find back on our website called visionofhumanity.org. It's an interactive map, so you see the color code already, so you can identify in red the least peaceful countries in the world, and in dark green the most peaceful countries in the world. Also, if you look at the map, you could already identify that Europe is the most peaceful region of the world. But as you can see, definitely surrounded by some of the least peaceful regions of the world. You will see that some countries improve, deteriorate. This is showing us that it's much more easy to deteriorate in peace than to increase in peace. It's really increasing in peace is extremely difficult and maybe comes with bits of a % per year, while once you start sliding in what I would call the violence trap or the conflict trap, well, this can go very fast and you can lose by double-digit % of your levels of peacefulness year on year. Yeah, and basically this is also telling us that we had a small deterioration in peacefulness in the past year. Yeah, next. All right, so as I said, the average level of global peacefulness has deteriorated by almost 0.5%. This is the 13th deterioration in the past 15 years. So that's really bad news. As I said, as you see, there are more countries improved their levels than countries deteriorated, but the difference in growth, or I would say decrease, is absolutely phenomenal. We have seen that improvements came with terrorism impact. So after the peak in 2015-16, we see clearly a lower impact today on terrorism, and definitely year on year. We have also seen that the political terror scale was basically a bit better than it was the year before. And we have also seen that military expenditure in percentage of GDP went down. We need to be very careful there because for two things. First of all, military expenditure in, I would say, nominal capita, so basically the number of dollars invested, this has been permanently on the rise in the past 10 to 15 years. But when you compare it to GDP, it's going down. So clearly you see that more and more is invested in the military, but also that the GDP is kind of growing fast, and therefore is giving another, I would say, another perception when you compare it to the percentage of GDP. The deterioration in the past year clearly came from external conflict fought, so I don't need to explain to you. I mean, we can lead by example through the Ukraine conflict, but you will see this is not the conflict who impacted us most last year. Political instability, that's pretty clear. We have seen the figure of civil unrest rising, or I would say rising by more than 200% over the past decade. So clearly there are also more political instability and more violence generated by political instability. And of course, the death from internal conflict were also on the rise last year. Next. So Iceland has been on top of the global peace index since inception. So again, the most peaceful country in the world. Libya and Burundi are the largest improvement, so that's good news. The MENA region is still the least peaceful region in the world, but we have seen in the past 3 years, 3 consecutive improvements of the levels of peacefulness. So that's clearly with the lower impact by conflicts in, well, I would say all three countries, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and in some way or form also in Yemen. So we clearly see that this is a region where, of course, the impact is still high, but we've seen improvement of in the past years, and definitely the impact of terrorism in this region and in those countries is lower than it was before. As I said, Europe is still the most peaceful region of the world, but we've seen deterioration inside Europe clearly also, both on negative and positive peace. Next. Afghanistan remains the world's least peaceful nation, although it has recorded an improvement and one of the largest improvement in peacefulness in the past year. This is mostly driven by the fact that, after the Taliban taking over and the Americans and basically NATO troops and foreign troops leaving, well, there was no enemy anymore to engage in combat with. So therefore, way less, I would say, combat violence, combat death, these kind of things. We have also seen that the impact of terrorism has decreased, I would say, tremendously. Why? Well, because the Taliban became the leading government and therefore cannot be associated anymore as being a non-state actor, and they disappeared from the data sets relating to the impact of terrorism, which is only measuring the impact of non-state actors. So a lot of different factors there leading to a bit more peacefulness. And of course, in a world that is permanently decreasing in peacefulness, even if a country like Afghanistan is growing a little bit, well, it can be identified as one of the largest increases, but still it's the least peaceful region and country in the world. So don't be fooled by those figures. We have seen that conflict deaths death increased by almost 100%. So we doubled year on year the number of people dying in conflict. And of course, we can go, we can talk about Ukraine and see that we lost about 85,000 people in this conflict in the past year. But if you look at the conflict in Ethiopia, for example, so the conflict in Tigray and what's going on in Ethiopia, we see that we are over 100,000 casualties, direct impact from this conflict also. So it's not only Ukraine. You can see that in other regions and in on other continents also, there's a huge impact of conflict, and really seeing the number of people dying in conflict doubling in 1 year. It's really like, yeah, it's mind-blowing. So when we look at the region Russia and Eurasia, of course, the steepest regional decrease. You can imagine why. But we have seen that on out of the 9 GPR regions which we have on record, 6 deteriorated in the past year. So you can clearly see that this is a global deterioration of the levels of peacefulness. Next. This is top 10 of the most peaceful countries. As I explained to you, Iceland is still there. And then you will find quite a lot of smaller countries applying a liberal democracy as a political system. Clearly there, even if, I participated in the press conference this morning talking about another index, and they were asking me, well, what about France? When you look at Europe, for example, of course, most or almost all countries in Europe apply this system of liberal democracy. You will see that, yes, most peaceful region of the world, but within Europe, you will see that you will first find the smaller countries having not lower, I would say, not such a high level of geopolitical interests, and also not such a developed defense industry. So those would be the first European countries represented on the index, followed by those bigger countries having larger or more geopolitical interest and a larger defense industry also. I'm talking about Sweden, about France, about the UK, about Germany, for example. There is a second or third batch there of European countries, and that would be European countries not member of the EU in the accessing process. And of course, I'm focusing on the Western Balkans. And finally, the last country in the group, or the European group, would be Turkey, with, of course, completely different approach to peacefulness. Even if we see these differences in the application of liberal democracies or the levels of peacefulness, almost all of the European countries are in the first third of the global peace index, so really having high to very high levels of peacefulness. Next. Well, if we go to the top 10, we need to go to the bottom 10 also. I would say countries totally impacted by war and by conflict. Russia was there before, but pulled Ukraine also into the bottom 10 of the global peace index. I said Afghanistan, still the least peaceful, even if there is some improvement. Same thing for Yemen, same thing for Syria. And of course, you might imagine looking at other conflicts emerging at the moment, how this is going to impact the global peace index, maybe not the next year, but on the mid and long term, you will find the same countries there, because it's very difficult to get out of this conflict and violence trap, but others will fall therein, so, and joining into the bottom of the global peace index. Next. Well, those are the 5 countries who improved the most. So Cote d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast, Libya, Burundi, Oman, and Afghanistan. As said, you clearly need to look at their ranking. When I look at Afghanistan, 163, the last one, Burundi 128, Libya 137, you can clearly see there that those countries are really having low levels of peacefulness, but still emerging from, I would say, a time in which conflict was impacting them more than it does today. So that's good news. Next one. The reverse there, the reverse or the flip coin of that, the flip side of that coin also, you can clearly see that other countries are really falling into peacefulness. As I said, Russia pulled Ukraine into the bottom 10 of the global peace index. Russia is also falling also, but we also see countries like Haiti or Mali or other countries of the Sahel really decreasing, with the high margin into the levels of peacefulness. So that's definitely bad news for those countries, but you can clearly identify conflict related to all, either internal or external, related to all those 5 most deteriorating countries. Yes, next. Well, let's open the time window now, maybe to a decade of 12 to 15 years. And let's see how much peace has improved or deteriorated, and also what were the trends about conflict and militarization. Next. So this is a graph showing you the evolution in the past 15 years. And of course, you know, this graph there, or this line going up is basically climbing to least peaceful levels. And as you can see on the second graph, well, as I explained before, 13 deteriorations in the past 15 years. And when you see the two improvement, it's totally marginal compared to the overall deteriorations. We have seen that over a period of 15 years, so since 2008, 97 countries deteriorated, while only 66 improved their levels of peacefulness. Next. Well, when we look at militarization, or when we look at the three main domains, we can see that safety and security within society remained, let's say, stable, maybe deteriorated a little bit. Militarization improved, but I already explained you why, because it's measured as a percentage of GDP. But if you would look at the nominal worth of the invested money, permanent growth over the past 15 years. Why? Because conflict has really incredibly increased over the past 10 to 15 years. So when we look at the motor of this deterioration in peacefulness, well, conflict is clearly, or has clearly been, the motor of this deterioration. Next. Some good news also, and sometimes news that you would not expect. Well, when we look at, you know, for example, a change in GPI scores or the death from terrorism in some parts of the world, and especially in this example, coastal West Africa. And I mean, Africa and West Africa is definitely, or has definitely been in the news today, yesterday, and in the past weeks and months also. Well, we can see that there has been an improvement in almost every countries of Western coastal Africa, an improvement in peacefulness over the past 15 years. But for example, also that last year, none of those countries experienced one casualty or one terrorist attack on their soil, which is really, really remarkable, taking into account that just their neighbors, the Sahel countries, are it's really the epicenter of terrorism and the countries most impacted by terrorism worldwide. So there must be another mindset there. There must be another investment in a peaceful future in those countries of Western coastal Africa. So yes, it's doom and gloom. Yes, it's a decrease or permanent decrease in peacefulness, and we don't really see how this trend is going to change. But you see that locally or even regionally, there can be also good news, and I would say a different approach to compared to the global average or the regional average. Next. Well, let's try to define the economic value of peace. So let's have a look at the economic impacts. I will break down for you how this investment is made, and I will also show you the 10-year trends. Yes. So last year, and this is really a peak again, the economic impact of violence, or basically the economic cost of violence, has been estimated up to $17.5 trillion US. It's an estimation, and I think we might assume that reality is really, really, really close to about double of this, or 2.5 times this figure. So this represents close to 13% of the world GDP, or $2,200 per person living on Earth. Just imagine what you would do, what we could do if we would decrease this by 1% or 10%. Well, 1% represents a total global budget for overseas development aid. So if we would reduce the cost of violence by 1%, we could double the budget for development aid, even humanitarian action and really development action. If we would go to 10%, this would represent the economies of 3 European countries like Ireland, Denmark, and Switzerland. This would represent also the total global budget for foreign direct investment. So just imagine what we could do if one day we would decide to decrease this economic impact by 1 or 10%. And if we dream big by even more, we could really make a difference, a positive difference, instead of permanently decreasing the levels of peacefulness and increasing this economic impact of violence. Next. Well, the breakdown is quite easy. It's about 80 or even more than 80% would be the indirect cost, which could be called the investment made in violence containment. Military expenditure is about 44% last year, but 30% of the expenditure goes to internal security, which would be some police forces or comparable paramilitary forces. a growing percentage and a growing investment into private security expenditure. So those are the Wagners of this world, also been in the quite in the news in the past weeks also. And as you can see, less than 20%, really less than 20%, about 16-17% of the cost of violence is direct cost of violence. So basically, how much does conflict cost? How much does suicide, homicide, or violent crime is costing? So when somebody is dying, how much is this impacting the economy, and what price needs to be tacked to this event? So indirect cost of violence containment over 80%, less than 20% dedicated to the direct impact of violence. What we also see in the 10 most affected countries, well, the average loss of GDP is 34%. If you take Ukraine in the past 1.5 years, it's more than 70% GDP loss due to the war. When you look at the 10 most affected countries' average GDP, so basically that's wrong. It's the 10 least affected countries in average GDP. They only lose about 2.9% to violence. So just that it is clear there. So one thing is clear there: when you lose more than 30% or even 40 or more of your GDP because of conflict, it's not the destabilization by the conflict, but it's also that there is no opportunity, there is no choice than to invest in violence. There is no other priority this budget could develop if you lose close to a third or half of your financial income. Next. Well, as you can see on this slide, the distribution between, I would say, the military expenditure, the internal and private security, the interpersonal violence and armed conflict and more is completely different between all 9 regions which we have on the Global Peace Index. So you will see that some regions, like the MENA region, invest a lot in the military, while in Central America and Caribbean, for example, it's clear that there's interpersonal violence and maybe gang wars that is causing the highest cost of violence. So depending on the region, or even depending on the countries, you will see a totally different distribution of those average figures of the cost of violence. Next. Let's have a look at some conflict trends and hotspots. Next. So we have clearly seen that violence increased in many different parts of the world. So Ethiopia, Mali, Myanmar, Ukraine, for different reasons. So the conflict in Ethiopia, the conflict in Ukraine, definitely conflict, coup d'etat, impact of terrorism in Mali, and of course this contra-junta type of insurgency in Myanmar also. We have seen, so those are the countries which show really an increase in violence. The drops came from Afghanistan and Yemen, which is of course good news, but as I explained to you before, still in a very, very difficult situation. What we also seen is that conflict was increasing even before the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So we have seen that the conflict-related death rose by 45% between 20 and 21. So there was a first increase there between 20 and 21. Between 21 and 22, 96%. So that's clearly something we need to acknowledge, and we need to definitely keep an eye on, because that's a very negative evolution. As I said to you, more conflicts, death in Ethiopia, 100,000 or more, but it's about 80 or 83,000 in Ukraine in 2022. And we have also seen that internationalized conflict have increased 9-fold since 2014. So in the past 15 years to 27. So 27 internationalized conflict in the world today. Next. So when we look at the ongoing conflict indicators, it's clear that we had an increase there after, I would say, in between the half of the 2000s up to 2013-14. Since then, a decrease, and as the figures are showing, especially when it came to the figures of the battle death and the increase in battle deaths globally, since 2019-2020, this steep increase in the number of battle deaths globally. Next. Well, that's enough about, I would say, the bad news coming out of the Global Peace Index, measuring negative peace, which is the absence of violence or the fear of violence. You know, it's a nice set of information, knowing what the level of peacefulness is, and also knowing what impacted your level of peacefulness. On the other hand, it also generates questions like, so what? Because it's just a snapshot taken at the end of the collection of data. So for most of the indicator, 31st of December last year, for the most volatile indicators, we try to monitor them until the 31st of March, but then we need to, of course, establish the index. Well, if you have this information, if you have this snapshot, But it's a nice to have. It's nice information, and it's very valuable information. But so what? How can you impact? How can you change your level of peacefulness? How can you have a systemic impact on your level of peacefulness? How can you increase? And we receive this question by a lot of countries throughout the world. How can we increase our ranking in the global peace index? Well, by investing in positive peace, by investing, and you see the different pillars over there, by investing in the structures, the institutions, and the attitudes which are most correlated with the creation of the creation of sustained peaceful societies. This is a systemic approach to peace. It's really an overarching systemic concept based on 8 interconnected pillars, as you can see over there. So we are talking about good levels of governance, high levels of human capital, equitable distribution of resources, good relations with your neighbors, low levels of corruption, sound business environments, a free flow of information. So really all those 8 pillars are most correlated with peaceful societies. If you invest in those pillars, you will see that your levels of peacefulness will grow, but you will also see, as I said before, that you get a vast array of different benefits when you start creating a more peaceful society. So what we do at the Institute for Economics and Peace is give a lot of training on this concept of positive peace. There is an online Positive Peace Academy, which you can access on our website, visionofhumanity.org, and you go on the tab Positive Peace Training or Positive Peace Academy. It's really easy to follow. It's especially the written text are through Google Translate and other software, translated in many I would say languages of the world, so the chance that you can follow it in your mother tongue is quite high. Also, next to that, we want to also have our own ambassadors promoting the work or the research IEP is doing, and more in particular, this principle of positive peace, basically explaining to the world the mission and the vision of IEP, which is to create an environment in which human potential can flourish. So what we want to achieve is that every individual of the world could have the chance to develop its full potential, or at least work on the development of its full potential. So the ambassador program, with ambassadors throughout the world, and now that you will see later on, the figures are quite impressive already. What we want to do is contribute to a more peaceful world, and also advance your own career prospects, but also advance the promotion of positive peace through the program. And so the program is designed to basically train you, but also provide you with information, resources, tools to understand and communicate innovative peace research. And this innovative peace research is systemic thinking, systemic peace development, and positive peace. Next. So the figures that I received from our section Positive Peace ambassadors and partnerships, it's definitely are definitely like impressive. We already trained 15 cohorts. We now have globally about just over 4,500 ambassadors. We have those ambassadors in 106 countries, and we have also seen that the number of people impacted by a single ambassador action. So this could be a workshop, this could be a presentation, this could be basically also a reflection on how to create more peacefulness in your own community. Well, the average number of people impacted by the work or by the action of an ambassador is close to 140. That's really amazing when you look at those figures. So what the ambassador could do is definitely be part of a global network of dedicated peace builders, and basically have the interaction also between all those different ambassadors, especially within the cohort. Is they have the potential to attend exclusive online and in-person events, but also the training. Through the training, you can gain concrete knowledge, skills, and resources that will allow you to communicate and activate, of course, IEP's innovative peace research, positive peace, but also to develop yourself as a peace builder, or at least develop yourself as somebody knowing much more about peace than before the training. And of course, when you do that, well, we hope that you will, and we are sure that you will contribute to building a more peaceful world. Next. So the IEP ambassador program, so you can do it online at your own pace. We have multiple intakes per year, which means that we have different cohorts per year. And we really see that there is a lot of structure now for the IEP ambassadors program. I would say at the same time last year, we had about 200, 300, 400 candidates per open cohort. This year, we had more than 1,200 candidates per cohort. And of course, we had to disappoint a lot of people, but definitely I would say, move them on to the next cohorts coming in. So the training is going over 3 modules, and of course, two multiple choice quizzes also, to make sure that you really studied well and understood everything in those modules also. You can have access to further reading and resources. So it's really like there is the minimal training, but then of course you can go further than that. There is a final assessment that is basically a presentation you need to do about an event you want to do, what you understood about positive peace, and you can of course get a certificate and a letter of completion, which is always nice to have in your CV as such. So it's really a great program, as you can see, set with people, like-minded people from all over the world. It's really at your own pace online, and you can really get a lot of benefits of taking this program and becoming an IEP ambassador. Next. So that's the end of my presentation. So as you can see, what is IEP doing? So it's a lot of core research. We really have a strong presence online, as you can see, over several social media. Definitely check out our Vision of Humanity website. You find all resources, everything we produce, the core research we produce, all the indexes, that's open source. You will find PowerPoints, you will find the full reports, but you will also find the interactive maps I spoke about before. We have this IEP Peace Academy. We do positive peace workshops throughout the world. And we, of course, have this ambassador program. So again, thank you for your attention, and to the organizers, thank you for inviting the Institute for Economics and Peace to come and talk about the results of their core research and also their ambassadors program. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Serge, for the great presentation. And I've actually took the ambassadors program before and the Positive Peace Academy, and I can attest to how incredible it was and how informative it was. And I definitely encourage everyone to apply and enroll and just conduct the training, because at least for me and the work that I do, it was very, very helpful. Great, thank you so much again. We have a few questions in the chat. I'm just going to read them out loud. And then as we respond to those, feel free to add all of your other questions as well. We have the first question coming from Frank. He asked, how can diplomatic efforts and effective conflict resolution mechanism contribute to global peace? Do you want to respond?
Yeah, should I take more than one or one by one?
Yeah, let's do one by one. Okay.
Well, you know, from a IEP, it's a great question. It's a great question, because what you want to find are other solutions to violence to address conflict. There's double approach there to double answer. First of all, because of the systemic nature of what I just explained, what we want to achieve is the creation of positive feedback loops, or at least what we would call virtuous cycles, which would be high levels of positive peace, generating low levels of grievances, which the conflict that would emerge from that could be addressed by those diplomatic efforts, could be addressed by mediation, negotiation, could be addressed by a lot of conflict resolution techniques, or even conflict prevention techniques. Therefore, you will see that the level of violence would be low. Therefore, you don't need to invest that much in violence containment, and therefore you can reinvest, I would say, the cash flow that you still have on your account into more initiatives on positive peace. That's a virtuous cycle. So in the approach, what you want to do is create those virtuous cycles, and of course avoid the vicious ones. And I don't need to explain to you that low levels of positive peace, high levels of grievances, high levels of violence, high investment in violence containment, there's no money left to change your levels of positive peace. So that's clearly one part of the equation. The other part is basically finding other solution, and we are working with a lot of different partners. I just had a chat this morning with Mediation Northern Ireland, trying to find solutions not only for Northern Ireland but other parts of the world, really facilitating mediation negotiation. We are discussing with them how we could integrate, peace leadership, peace diplomacy, mediation, negotiation within our trainings on positive peace. And I think when you look at the levels of increased level of violence and increased investment into the military, and of course we live in a different world today. We live in a offensive or maybe realist world, but I would call it an offensive realist world when it comes to international relations. Well, this is a world based on competition. This is a world in which sovereignty, the territory, your population, your security is really central, and not peace anymore, as it was before in the liberal system managed by multilaterals and international law and international organizations. So as we see more and more of this competition and more potential for conflict, I think those diplomatic efforts and all those different tools for conflict resolution should be applied, first of all, in conflict prevention. So basically in the phase between two crises, or in the phase that we would call increased tension. So we need to defuse potential conflict before it gets worse. But definitely also in trying to find well-balanced, well-established peace settlements or peace agreements, and also well-organized transition into more peaceful future for countries or parties involved in conflict.
Yep, very spot on. Thank you for that answer. So we have another question from Simon. There is an increase in terrorist attacks and in coup d'etat in Sahel region. This is going to fuel the spread of terrorism and other transnational organized crime across the African continent. Some of our regional blocs are weak to come up with drastic measures to address this. So how can we best address it?
I mean, it's a great question again, and you're absolutely right. So when we look at the evolution of terrorism, and that's of course related to another publication, the Global Terrorism Index, we can clearly see that over the past 3 to 5 years, we have seen a shift from the MENA region towards the Sahel region. And in the Sahel region, it's mostly Mali and Burkina Faso most impacted, but we also see neighboring countries coming under pressure of the threat of terrorism. There is clearly a certain form of endemic terrorism over there, and terrorism is mostly seen as technique, tactique, and procedure within an insurgency fight, or within, I would say, a more larger destabilization of those countries in the region. There is a reason why it's happening there, and that's the weakness of the institutions. The attitudes were deteriorated, and clearly also the lack of structure in those countries. So for those who listened well to what I said and what I just said now, it's basically low levels of positive peace. So the potential for conflict is higher in those countries than the neighboring ones. That's also what I showed in my presentation. So when you have a large terrorist group like the Islamic State, which comes under pressure, or even Boko Haram in northeast Nigeria, coming under pressure from, I would say, an international coalition, and they start to spread to other regions, they're going to identify basically those areas in which their ideology, but also their techniques or their modus operandi would have the highest chance of success. Well, of course, these will be areas with low levels, basically low levels of positive peace. So bad governance, high levels of corruption, basically areas already very fragile, very destabilized. Well, they will just add to the problem. So you're absolutely right. Focus epicenter is Sub-Saharan Africa, with, I would say, almost 50% of all terrorist attacks in the world occur in Sub-Saharan Africa, with 90% of those 50% occurring into the Sahel region. And we clearly see the figures going up and going up and going up. And I can only imagine, with all those other coup d'etats in the region, that this is only going to get worse in the coming years. Solution to that is positive peace. I'm very sorry, but if you have stronger structures and institutions, and if your attitudes are pointing towards stability, development, resilience, and peaceful society, well, those guys are not going to knock on your door. You know, they're just going to use the other door when they have a better chance of success. Of course, you can look at this on a regional basis, maybe at the level of a city, maybe at the level of a state in Africa. But you're absolutely right to say that there needs to be a systemic change also in the approach towards peace, on the approach towards the organization of societies on the African continent. I think it's too easy to point out every year that for almost every of our publications, when it comes to the impact of violence, the impact of terrorism, or even the balance between ecological degradation, the resilience of countries to address those shocks, well, every time Sub-Saharan Africa is seen as the epicenter, the hotspot of the most impacted part of the world. I think the development Africa should go through, and of course this is my biased Western approach to this, should be in a development through positive peace, and definitely not the developments we are seeing at the moment, influenced and orchestrated by other superpowers trying to basically take over or abuse Africa in the same way that the West did it before. So I think it's up to the Africans to maybe start to decide about their own future, not relying on any Western power, but also not relying on any other power basically dictating them how to do so. I think the African continent is strong enough, has enough potential to basically take its future in its own hands and try to develop their own institutions, structures, and attitudes, and develop their own levels of positive peace.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely makes a lot of sense. We have a couple more questions from Frank, but just to be fair to everyone, I'll go back to those questions, Frank, if we don't have any more, but I want to give the chance to other attendees to also ask their questions. Maybe now link into our community of practice team, which is youth engagement. We have a question from Raymond asking, how exactly is conflict correlating to youth? Are your statistics showing any involvement of youth in violence than other categories? And if so, by how much?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's we can look at potential for violence. Let's say in Africa, for example, when you look at the demographic, I would say graph today for Africa, you have a youth bulge leading to questions about the future. Will there be a future for those people, for this youth at the moment? And of course, the potential there for, I would say, radicalization or lack of perspective, lack of future. Well, that's I would say the very, very good, I would say, fertile soil to come in with preconceived ideas, come in with ideas basically radicalizing you either towards extreme violence, towards conflict, or towards migration or anything else. So definitely it's not positive at the moment. When you look at the provision for the demographic evolution for sub-Saharan Africa for the next 30 years, this continent is going to double its population. Countries like Niger are predicted to almost triple their population in the next 30 years. So you can imagine if it's all this continent or those countries are already under pressure today, are basically not tackling the problems youths are facing, this problem is only going to increase. And of course, the potential for this youth to find basically, to find a solution within violence or to find a solution within radicalization will be much higher. I think, I mean, Balkis, you come from Tunisia, and Tunisia, when you look at foreign terrorist fighters or the impact of terrorism, has been the country really, providing in percentage per, I would say, head of population, but also in numbers, the highest number of foreign terrorist fighters. Tunisians are not different from the others and are not more radicalized or more crazy believer than others. But when you have to choose between having if you get a job which is going to pay you between $100 and $200 if you earn that much per month, and the Islamic State coming by and offering you between $1,000, $2,000, $2,500 to just join them, not always as a fighter, but also just member of society. You can be a baker, you can be a butcher, you can be a mechanic also, basically help them building the Islamic State. If you're really under pressure, I think it's an easy choice. And so what we need to do for the future is, of course, take into account this incredible economic demographic increase which we are facing, and make sure that the system, there we're going to come back to positive peace, we need to make sure that the societies in which this youth is going to be basically going to be born, is going to grow up, well, has the resilience, has those structural institutions, has the capacity to provide them with a future. So we need to make sure, if we want to do some support, if you want to do some development, we need to make sure that this development is going to focus on this, is creating an environment in which there will be enough schools, enough teacher, enough food, enough water, enough, I would say, enough public goods, enough positive peace. So that's what we need to look at. Now, if you want to disaggregate the figures, it is very, very difficult to it is very, very difficult to really see the portion of the youth in I would say engaging in conflict. Anyhow, there are many different issues. Some choose for it, some are forced to get into the forces. Now it is really clear that when you look at military forces or combat forces, usually this will be young people. This will be young people, but I don't think that this is a representation that this number of youth getting into conflict or getting into military or paramilitary groups is really marginal compared to the bulk of youth that you find in most of the countries impacted. What we see on the other end is an over-representation of women and youth into peace movement and community and civil society solutions trying to bring more peace. That's what we see.
Yes, definitely. And maybe another question also in relation to that. I know this is a bit general, but it's interesting also to ask. So how can we best address the structural barriers that limit the participation of young people in influencing decision making?
Well, I mean, I will sound boring, but my answer again there would be to have high levels of positive peace. Why? Why? Because first of all, including in empowering youth, and look at this program that is, organizing this webinar today. Well, clearly you see that some governments see that there is power in youth, that there is quality in youth, and that we should build and also provide trust and confidence to youth. First of all, there's potential there, so use the potential and believe in the potential. That's what you need to do. That's I would say the first approach is understanding what's going on. So good levels of governance in your business, in sound business environment, give an opportunity to youth, believe in them, give them jobs, integrate them into the job market. When it comes to the development of human capital, allow your youth to develop their potential. Organize education, make sure that they can really develop their full potential, and equitable distribution of resources. So make sure that there is, in all aspects of society, in all disaggregation of the data that you can have, that all groups represented, that there is a diversity of opportunities for all groups represented in society. And I would even say with a focus on youth, because they will be the building blocks they are already a building block today, but they will be the main building blocks of future societies. And I can go on and on, pillar per pillar, and really explain that there is a youth potential. You need to use it. And on the other end, especially in those, I would say, parts of the world most impacted by conflict or destabilization, these are the parts of the world where you will see the highest percentage of youth in the demographic curve. So more and more, these are the game changers. These are the peacemakers. So let's invest in youth, and let's invest in change through youth empowerment.
Yes, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe just a question to end on from the chat. How does economic interdependence between nations impact the likelihood of conflict?
Well, I mean, I need to give you a very theoretical answer to this one. And that's what I explained, the shift from a liberal organization of international relations towards a realist organization of international relations. In the liberal approach, peace is central, because peace is the key element allowing this interconnection between democracies, interconnection between economic system, and basically creating an international system managed by international law and international organization in which I would say, the reasoning that you would have is to say, like, if I create conflict here, if I create violence, this is going to be much more detrimental to me than to keep the peace and to keep this interaction. So basically, the interaction are not creating the peace, but its peace needs to be central to basically allow the interaction. So it's a very systemic approach there. It's almost chicken and the egg. It's like, is the peace allowing the interactions, or are the interactions creating the peace? But that's basically the liberal system in which we used to live, and in which we still think in the West, and especially in Europe, that we are living at the moment. The reality is completely different, and the world is really changing at a very high pace. And in the new system, in the system that we are applying at the moment, which is a realist system, or even I would say an offensive realist system, peace is just a nice to have. It's not central in the system anymore. And those interactions are basically becoming competition. I mean, look at, you know, the first steps of the Ukrainian conflict, the Russian aggressions against Ukraine. We have seen that the existing connections to Russia very quickly turn into toxic interdependencies. And especially Europe has really been working the past 1.5 years in trying to cut those links, those toxic links, those toxic dependencies and interdependencies with Russia also. So as we are shifting from one to the other, we are basically shifting from one system in which peace is central into a system where competition is central. And so the interconnections which were creating peace or were part of the architecture of peace are now basically creating conflict and creating a potential for, I would say tensions, or these toxic interdependencies most of the time become toxic at the moment. It's an excellent question also.
Yeah, definitely. We had a lot of excellent questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Serge, for your input. I think we'll end it here with the Q&A. You can ask more questions, though, when you have the chance to ask Serge more questions, as we'll have him again in another webinar soon. So definitely keep an eye for our announcement on that. Thanks again, Serge, for your input, and everyone for participating in the chat. Great questions. Definitely make sure to take this conversation to our COP, our platform and our discussion forum, and continue asking your questions there. And now I'll hand it over to Justine to share a few reminders.
Thanks so much. And so, as was mentioned, we have the second part of this webinar happening on September 21st. It will go more into the power of transformational positive peace framework. So be on the lookout for that event description and flyer coming soon. We also have a power of advocacy and strengthening gender transformation program that is hosted by our Gender COP. That will be happening on September 6th at 9 a.m. And then we also have the Climate Action Through Higher Education initiatives in Latin America, which will be hosted by our HEET COP on September 12th at 9 a.m. So definitely keep an eye out for all those events. We look forward to hopefully you attending all of them. As always, you can keep this discussion going on different social media platforms. We're available on Twitter, Facebook, I guess it's called X now, not Twitter, and Instagram. So definitely connect with us, and we look forward to your future participation and continued conversation.
Great. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Stay safe.
Bye, everyone.